Hello everyone! What you are looking at here is not just an American warship on patrol. It is the USS Gerald R. Ford sitting inside a live regional crisis, already tied into the U.S. response to the attacks on Israel, and now operating with the kind of constant combat readiness that tells you Washington is preparing for more than symbolism. That is the first thing to understand. This is not a flag-waving photo op. This is a floating airbase, a moving strike platform, and a 4,600-person machine built to stay ready while the region stays unstable. And that changes the story immediately. Because when people hear carrier strike group, they picture power, jets, escorts, missiles, radar, dominance. What they usually do not picture is the brutal human system underneath that power. The part that has to function every minute, or the image of control starts to crack. The Ford does not get to pause because headlines change. Fighters launch around the clock. Cargo moves between decks nonstop. Mechanics, pilots, cooks, reactor operators, medical staff, that alone would be serious. But the deeper point is even more serious. A carrier like this is supposed to project stability by showing overwhelming readiness. Yet, the very need to keep a ship this large in a constant state of combat preparation tells you the environment around it is dangerous enough that routine no longer looks routine. Every launch cycle, every armed aircraft, every watch rotation sends the same message. The United States wants options on the table now, not later. And those options depend on human endurance. Down in the lower decks, sailors sleep in berthing compartments packed with 40 to over 100 people, depending on the section. Bunks are stacked 2 or 3 high. Each rack is about 6 feet long and barely wide enough to turn over. There is a thin mattress, a pillow, a curtain for a little privacy, and a small coffin locker underneath for personal gear. That is where people recover after 12-hour shifts or longer. Not in comfort, not in silence. In a compartment where hatches keep opening, boots keep hitting the deck, and somebody is always coming or going. That is what sustained military pressure really looks like. The same thing shows up in the heads and showers. Shared bathrooms, tight spaces, water rationed. Showers kept short to protect fresh water supplies. Even on one of the most advanced carriers ever built, there's no escaping the core reality. Massive power projection still comes down to discipline, routine, and thousands of people accepting discomfort as normal because the mission does not slow down for them. Then there is food, which sounds small until you understand what it really means. Feeding 4,600 people 3 to 4 times a day without interruption is not a side issue. It is logistics under pressure. 2 major galleys, culinary specialists working in shifts, breakfast moving into lunch, lunch moving into dinner, and then another meal for the overnight watch. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, roast beef, fish, rice, vegetables, pizza, ribs, salads, desserts. Not because this is luxury, but because a ship running flight operations and combat readiness burns through people fast if you do not keep them fueled. Below those galleys sit refrigerated storerooms loaded with frozen meat, produce, dairy, and dry goods. The Ford even uses ethylene filters to keep fruit and vegetables fresh longer. That sounds like a minor technical detail. It is not. It is one more sign that this ship is built for a sustained presence, not a brief appearance. Presence is the point. Endurance is the point. Staying on station while the region keeps shifting is the point. And above all of that, the flight deck never sleeps. The Ford's electromagnetic launch system throws fighters off the bow faster and with less wear than older steam catapults. Yellow shirts guide the aircraft. Green shirts hook them up. Red shirts arm them. Then the catapult fires and another jet is gone. Seconds later, the next one rolls forward. That rhythm is not cinematic decoration. That rhythm is deterrence backed by hardware, timing, and people who cannot afford mistakes. Because once a carrier like this is already in motion, the real question is no longer whether America can show force, The real question is how long this level of pressure can hold before the mission gets bigger. And this is where the image of effortless power starts to break apart. From the outside, a supercarrier looks like pure dominance. A giant deck. Fast jets. Escorts somewhere beyond the horizon. Radar, missiles, command authority, and a national flag telling everyone in the region to think twice. But inside that steel hull, the reality is less glamorous and much more revealing. Power at this level is not smooth. It is labor-intensive, fragile in the details, and brutally dependent on thousands of small things going right that's saying. Look below the flight deck and you see the hidden pressure immediately. The hangar bay is not a backdrop. It is a second battlefield of maintenance, noise, fuel, timing, and risk. Aircraft come down on the deck edge elevators for repairs, checks, and rearming. Mechanics work under fluorescent lights on engines, avionics, hydraulics, and parts that cannot fail once a jet is back in the air. Weapons crews assemble and stage the next load cycle. Carts move spare parts through tight spaces. Forklifts cut through the hum of ventilation. Air tools keep screaming. Nothing about that is theatrical. It is industrial pressure, non-stop, inside a ship already operating in a live crisis. And the contradiction is obvious once you see it. The Ford is built to project control, but control at this scale depends on a machine that never stops shaking, feeding, repairing, cooling, washing, transporting, and recalculating. It depends on people doing technical work while tired. It depends on systems that have to keep functioning in heat, noise, movement, and stress. The public sees the launch. It rarely sees the exhaustion underneath the launch. That matters because combat readiness is not just about weapons. It is about sustainability under strain. The ship reportedly produces more than 400,000 gallons of fresh water a day through desalination systems. That water feeds showers, kitchens, laundry, and drinking supplies for the entire crew. Nearly 5,000 people generate a constant flood of uniforms, linens, towels, and work gear. So the laundry runs continuously. The washing machines do not stop. The dryers do not stop. It sounds mundane until you understand what that really means. Even cleanliness becomes part of combat endurance when a ship this size has to stay ready without relief. Then there is the medical side, and that is another signal people should not ignore. This ship carries more than pilots and weapons specialists. It carries a full hospital capability, routine medical care, emergency response, surgery, dental services, a pharmacy, and mental health support. That is not there for decoration. It is there because prolonged operations wear people down. Accidents happen, equipment injures, stress accumulates, and warships do not get the luxury of pretending human beings are replaceable parts. The stronger the military image, the easier it is to miss the fact that the entire structure still rests, food, morale, and ramaracked tight. And underneath all of it sit the systems that make failure unacceptable. Reactor operators below the waterline keep 2 nuclear reactors running. Electricians keep power flowing. Damage control teams stay ready for fire, flooding, or battle damage. Communications teams keep the ship connected. Supply keeps the entire organism fed with parts and material. Every department runs on its own schedule, but the schedules interlock. That is where the real pressure lives. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the constant possibility that if one layer slips, the consequences spread fast. That is why this ship matters beyond its size. A carrier is supposed to reassure allies, deter enemies, and create space for political decisions. But the more intensely it operates, the more clearly it tells you the crisis around it is not settled. Presence can calm a region. It can also signal that Washington sees real danger ahead and wants force already positioned before the next shock lands. That is the deeper message here. Not just strength, anticipation. And once a country starts positioning for what might come next, the line between deterrence and escalation gets thinner than people want to admit. Because the real issue now is not whether the ship can keep running. It can. The issue is what kind of event would force it from readiness into action. What makes this story dangerous is not just the size of the ship. It is what the ship represents when it is already deployed, already working at full rhythm, and already woven into a wider military response. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not drifting through calm water as a symbol. It is operating in the Red Sea with roughly 4,600 people inside a system that never sleeps, never really resets, and never stops preparing for the next order. And that is where the real pressure sits. Because a carrier this large is built to project confidence. That is the public image. Steel, aircraft, escorts, nuclear power, around-the-clock launches, and the message that the United States can put force exactly where it wants, exactly when it wants. But the deeper truth is harder and less comfortable. The more relentlessly a ship like this has to stay ready, the more it tells you the people making decisions do not believe the danger is over. That is the contradiction people should be watching now. Strength is supposed to calm the situation. But strength on this scale can also mean Washington is bracing for a wider one. The Ford can feed thousands, launch fighters in cycles, move cargo between decks, produce more than 400,000 gallons of fresh water a day, run medical care, laundry, weapons prep, reactor operations, and flight maintenance without pause. That is an extraordinary display of capacity. It is also a sign that this is not a short visit built for headlines. It is a platform built for sustained pressure if the crisis sped. And crises like this do spread, not always in one dramatic leap, sometimes in smaller moves that pile up fast. One strike answered by another. One militia action that pulls in a bigger response. One shipping threat that changes naval posture. One misread signal. One overconfident assumption. One night where deterrence fails and readiness turns into action. That is how a military presence meant to prevent escalation can suddenly become part of escalation. That may not be the intent. But intent is not the same thing as outcome. Inside the ship, every detail says the same thing. Sailors sleeping in stacked racks after 12-hour shifts. Shared heads. Rationed showers. Galleys serving meal after meal without interruption. Mechanics below the flight deck working on aircraft that may be needed again within hours. Medical staff preparing for emergencies they hope never come. Damage control teams ready for fire, flooding, or battle damage at any time. This is not just a portrait of discipline. It is a portrait of a nation keeping one of its most expensive instruments of force in a state of waiting. Waiting for what exactly? That is the question hanging over all of this. Is this primarily deterrence, meant to stop the next move before it happens? Or is it pre-positioning for a situation officials believe has a real chance of getting worse? Those are not the same thing. And the answer matters, because once a carrier strike group is already in place, response time shrinks, options widen, and the political cost of using force can start to feel lower than the cost of appearing passive. That is when danger multiplies. Because from a distance, readiness looks clean. Up close, it is exhausting, expensive, human, and one step away from real consequences for people far beyond the ship itself. Sailors absorb the grind. Families absorb the uncertainty. Markets react. Shipping routes react. Allies read the signal. Rivals read the signal too. And somewhere in that chain, one decision can change the entire meaning of why that carrier was there in the first place. So that is the deeper issue. Not whether the Ford is powerful. It is. Not whether the crew can keep the machine running. They can. The deeper issue is whether this kind of permanent readiness is containing the crisis, or quietly telling us that the people closest to it expect another turn. That is the part I want your view on. Is this the stabilizing presence that prevents a wider war? Or is it the clearest sign yet that the system is preparing for one? Leave your perspective in the comments, but keep it serious and grounded because this is not a game and the stakes are not abstract. Watch the next development closely. That is where the real answer will start to show. And subscribe so you do not miss the next shift in this story.